Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TME Presents an Iconic Renovation at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. You've read the article, now learn the rest of the story. I'm Daniel Wheatley, Associate Editor for the Military Engineer, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. But before we get started, though, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. All the attendees are in a listen-only mode for the presentation. You can submit questions for the presenters at any time by using the questions pane on your control panel. We will collect these and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please also submit any technical issues you may be encountering here as well. A little backstory on this project. The Commissioned Officers Club at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in San Diego has hosted numerous events, meetings, and social gatherings since it was built in the 1950s. Most famously, it is the setting for the memorable scene in the 1986 film Top Gun, in which the lead characters serenade their flight instructor. However, after more than 60 years, the famed club had lost a little of that love and feeling itself. A $7.7 million design-build project by Stellar, a fully integrated design-build firm, renovated the main entrance and kitchen, as well as making a number of life safety upgrades. Shortly after work got underway, though, priorities changed. Decades of unknown upgrades and unforeseen conditions made what seemingly had been a straightforward project into a uniquely complex renovation, one that would showcase the flexibility available to the design-build process. I would now like to introduce the speakers from Stellar today. Joe Mark, Vice President of Operations, Commercial Division, Bill Richason, Construction Project Manager, and Tony Lamell, Vice President and Chief Architect. Joe, Bill, Tony, you have the digital floor now, so take it away.
Thank you.
Good morning. You want to change the slide?
Next slide.
Next slide.
Do we have it?
Next.
Okay.
So we're here to talk about the Marine Corps Air Station Commissioned Officers Club renovation and expansion. And our webinar includes, next slide, 5 portions. We're going to talk about our relationship with IMCOM, the extensive seismic and life safety upgrades, extensive unforeseen conditions, major renovation aspects of the project, and a stop work order. Next slide.
Next slide.
So we have IMCOM G-9 is the ultimate customer, and we're on our 3rd IDIQ contract. And over 14 or 15 years, we've done a number of MWR projects, consisting of Shades of Green in Orlando, Halikoa Hotel in Oahu, Hawaii, Fort Benning Army Lodge in Georgia, and Miramar Flightline Marine Mart. Now, Miramar Flightline Marine Mart was kind of the catalyst for the Commissioner's Officers Club renovation. We got completed with the Flightline Marine Mart, and then our client came to us and said, we have a small SRM project that we want you to implement at the Commission's Officers Club. Well, that small project turned into roughly $8 million worth of renovation and expansion. Next slide.
I'll jump in here. So this is Bill Richason, and as Daniel mentioned, I was the project manager on the Officers Club. And so on this particular project, it was, as Joe mentioned, design build, and most of the additions, or all of the additions, were about 7,500 square foot in total. And so just I'll hit a few of the highlights here of what our contracted scope was when we started out on the project. And so the first item was a 1,350 square foot addition to the building's north entrance. And a couple elements of that expansion there was the new canopy entrance. And the new Canopy entrance, we had, with the Miramar Air Station being having a strong heritage of flight, we try to incorporate some aspect of their heritage into the design. And so you'll see in some pictures on subsequent slides that the main canopy, or the north entrance canopy, resembles that of a wing. So that's one part of that expansion. The other was a pre-function corridor, and that need was driven by the fact that before the addition, there was a single corridor that was shared between guests and also kitchen staff, and so they wanted to add an additional pre-function corridor to funnel all the guests through, and then designate the interior corridor for use of just the kitchen staff. And that interior corridor services the ballrooms and also the banquet room. So it was much needed to add there. And then we also did a 4,500 square foot full renovation of the kitchen space. And this was probably the most in-depth and the most challenging aspect of this project. We'll go into more depth of that here shortly. And then we also did a 1,200 square foot addition to the back side of the kitchen, which included all new walk-in coolers. They had some dry storage needs, and then we also upgraded the main bar location, which is on the other side of the facility. So we added a beer cooler as well as bar prep and storage areas. And then the other component to this project is, Joe had mentioned that this was an SRM project, which SRM stands for
Sustainment, Restoration, and Modernization.
So generally, going into a project when it's an SRM budget, it's a smaller dollar project, and so through analysis and the scope that we had identified, PRV stands for plant replacement value, and I believe the trigger is 30%. Anytime that you're doing a renovation that exceeds 30% of the value of the building, you're required to perform some updates to the facility, and some of those code requirements were ADA or ABA, and then life safety, which comprised of fire protection systems. That was an all new fire protection system, and then replace in kind with all new updated fire alarm systems, and then also seismic upgrades. So being that this is in San Diego, we obviously have some seismic concerns and had to upgrade those. So we can go on to the next slide here. All right.
So real quick, the overall floor plan, as you see in the top center, there's the shaded area, which is the existing areas that were to remain essentially as not part of the original scope of work. To the far right on the plan is the bar that we also had to renovate as part of the scope, where we had the beer cooler and those things added. To the bottom left is where the new entrance corridor, pre-function corridor, added to the exterior of the building. And to the left of that, off this graphic, is where the main parking area is for the existing site. And then in the bottom center is the large 4,500 square foot kitchen area. What's important in the plan is, in order to accomplish the expansions or additions to the facility, as part of that analysis, we had to look at the allowable areas within the unsprinklered components. And over time, there had been fire party walls that separated the kitchen area from the large banquet halls, but those walls had been compromised over time. And we had two options. One was to essentially redo and create a compartmentalization in plan to avoid major sprinkler upgrades, or the second was to do a whole sprinkler upgrade to bring the facility into current compliance, and that was the decision that was made.
Okay, next slide. All right, so speaking of the PRV, the plant replacement value code-driven updates, I spoke on the seismic and just kind of wanted to go into a little bit of depth of what that entailed. So we knew going in that we were going to have to do all this, and we actually partnered up with a local seismic engineer who worked directly underneath the engineer of record. Again, Stellar's a design build firm, so we, having had this project in San Diego, we sometimes will obtain consultant services through local entities to perform scopes of this nature. So as far as the seismic upgrades, there were strategic areas throughout the facility that were deemed necessary to saw cut and remove slabs. You can see on the right, that's an interior corridor where we removed the slabs, excavated down, and then there was specific details where we would add additional rebar reinforcement doweled into the existing foundation. And in essence, what you're doing is you're widening the foundation and ultimately resisting, I guess, turnover could be the term we use here. But so it was that, and then also the exterior where we had to excavate down and do the same thing, just widen the girth of the foundations there. So next slide, please. Okay, so we had foundation strengthening. We also had shear panel reinforcement. So again, in strategic areas around the building, we had to demo out, and you'll see the picture on the left where we're demoing out the existing plaster. And then we went back with 1/2-inch CDX plywood, which spanned the entire face of different areas. And then subsequently we went back and put new stucco over the exterior facade. So next slide. So just more pictures of the same and just kind of the process. You can see the layout there where we're getting ready to stucco.
And this is Tony. On the far left picture, you see columns placed in front of the wood paneling. The wood paneling is the existing exterior. You see the dark areas. Those were the entrances from the outside into the ballroom spaces. They have one large room area which could be subdivided into 3 rooms, and so that's why there are the number of entrances. And part of the scope, once again, was to create an interior corridor so they could access those rooms not from outside under weather concerns, but from an interior connection point. And you see the columns had to be built independent from the existing structure to avoid any of the structural issues.
That's the expansion area.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we talked about the foundation strengthening. We talked about the shear panel wall reinforcement. So then there was also concerns of the roof diaphragm and the necessary reinforcement there. And so what you're looking at here is there are structural wood beams all around the perimeter of the facility, or where the ends of the beams protrude through the exterior wall. And so that occurred all around the perimeter of the facility. So one of the details was to drill and attach anchors and hold downs through the wall into the existing beams. And so the intent was to secure those in place in the event of a seismic event or earthquake, prevent those beams from shaking off the top of that wall. So, and then subsequently you'll see some pictures as well, but we had an architectural cap that covered the ends of these beams as well as the washers you see there. So next slide. Okay, so going into this project, we knew that there were hazardous materials. Facilities constructed, like they said, back in the late 50s. And so we had onboarded a consultant or asbestos survey and had them go out and they identified all the different materials that were considered hot. So we had asbestos, there was lead, we found some areas with some mold, and so through the natural course of abatement, we prepped all the areas and abated everything so we could go back with the new materials. So when you see on the left, that's the kitchen space. And you see all the walls are lead. This is just the picture in the middle is just some of the corridors leading up to the kitchen. And then the far right picture is like something you see out of a horror movie. It's the boiler room, and of course all the insulation and everything leading up to it was had add hazardous materials.
And I guess this is a result of a building that's 60 years old that had a number of renovations and additions that wasn't very well documented.
Correct, yeah. So yeah, there was some obvious challenges that came from that, and we'll cover some of those on additional unforeseen conditions. So, all right, next slide, please. So yeah, just some additional pictures of the abatement process. Of course, everything's plasticed off, and we have air scrubbers and just the natural process of abatement. So it was all, I guess what was the word I was looking for? Sorry. But yeah, that's the process. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, so what you're looking at here is this is a floor plan view, and you can see the two red lines designate a couple existing structural wood beams. And so as we were demoing out these various areas, we encountered these two structural beams. And so looking at them, they were significantly charred. And so we come to find out there was a fire that had occurred many, many years prior. And so our structural team had some obvious concerns there to make sure that it still had its structural integrity. So the seismic engineer that we had worked with, came out and did some analysis and reviewed the charred beams. And fortunately, we were able to identify that it didn't need any additional structural reinforcement, and it was superficial charring.
Also, just for information, this is of the kitchen area. The dashed lines indicate walls as they were in place to be removed. Also, what you see is one of the solutions we did is there's a 4-foot interior ring around this rectangular shaped footprint of existing concrete floor slab that we retained. So everything that's interior to that, that's more white in color, is slab that we removed in entirety.
Yep. Next slide. Okay, and here's pictures. You can see where the flashlight's shining. That's looks like a campfire up in the ceiling space. So, yep, no additional reinforcement was necessary, fortunately. But next slide. Okay, so again, this is a floor plan. We'll show you a few different floor plans. We have plumbing and also civil, but this is of the kitchen space, and this is the original design. And I'll just kind of go over the quick concept of what we had versus what we ended up with. And so the lines that we have highlighted there, you have a green grease waste line that's running out towards the right of the screen. You can see the area that's highlighted. It says existing grease waste. So there's a existing grease interceptor right outside the building. And so the intent was to run everything serving the new equipment to run out towards the south. And then you see a whole other entire main that would be running out towards the north of the facility. And I'll show you a civil plan so it makes a little more sense where it was going. And we were going to put a new grease interceptor there. You can go to the next slide. And again, this is the original design. So, and so this is the picture you just saw, or the floor plan you just saw. Again, the mains going out to the existing grease interceptor, and then also the new one on the left. So, okay, next slide. Okay, so the challenges that we underwent in the process of tearing out all the slabs in the kitchen for all new MEP or new plumbing infrastructure to support the kitchen renovation, we started to look at the existing grease waste piping, and we had some kind of foreshadowing of these issues in that when we talked to the original, or we talked to the end user, they had a significant amount of backups over the years, and we started to understand why that was happening. So you can see the picture on the left and also in the center. This is all the cast iron piping, all original piping. And so you had significant blockages in the system from just years of buildup. I mean, that was 50%, 60% clogged. In other areas, we actually had, probably closer to 90% backup. And so that was one condition. The other was, you can see in the picture on the left where the pipe wall is actually caving in. It just had totally deteriorated. So the integrity of the pipe was compromised. And then in other areas, this is all a gravity flow system where you had low-lying areas where it was just standing waste, and that might have contributed to the accelerated deterioration. So, and then we'll address the picture on the right, which is just undocumented utilities, which was part of the challenges of the redesign. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's the revised design. This is what we actually ended up doing. And the very challenging thing with this whole redesign is that this was all critical path. The kitchen was the primary activity that we would ultimately affect the end date. So with all the issues that we had with the failing system, we also encountered the red line on the right side you see there running up and down on the screen. That is a concrete encased electrical feed. So again, undocumented, nothing was shown on the old plans. And again, this is a gravity fed system. And so part of the challenge there is working around that electrical or concrete encased feeder. So what we ended up doing is we determined that we just do, instead of having two separate branches or two separate grease waste mains, that we would combine it into one system and then increase the size of our grease interceptor and just run it out towards, I guess, plan south here. So we'll show you on the subsequent page, which is the civil drawing. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so you can see the green line going out the bottom of the building. We dropped I don't know I couldn't remember what the size of the grease interceptor was, but we dropped a much larger capacity grease interceptor, abandoned the one off to the side of the building there that's highlighted yellow. And so after the grease interceptor, we turned to 90, and we had to do a lot of exploratory digging and a lot of investigations to figure out that the inverts would work and that we could tie into the sanitary sewer main that was running out to the street. So fortunately, everything worked out, but there was a significant amount of input we needed from the field and also from the design team to figure out a solution that worked and could maintain schedule. So there were some significant challenges there that we overcame and had to expedite those efforts to keep from impacting the project. So next slide. Okay, this is just a picture of the concrete encased feeder. You can see that you know, it's crossing the trench there, and so that was at the same invert elevation as the piping we were running through. So it created some challenges with the design.
I guess the good thing is you found that fairly quickly.
We did, yeah. So it you know, some of the stuff looks like stuff you see in Afghanistan. It's just all the dirt piles inside the building, just a shell of a building, you know, back when we were renovating it. So it was a significant endeavor, but we got through it. So, all right, next slide. Okay, so among other unforeseen issues or conditions, you know, of course, with a full-on renovation of the kitchen space, when we started demoing out walls, and again, this is kind of the theme here, is just lack of documentation going into this. You know, we plan based on what we know. And then once we start tearing out walls and new conditions present themselves, we just have to adjust and move forward with it. So in this case, we tore some walls out and found some downspout or some roof drain leaders terminating into, you know, in a cavity where, you know, with a new floor plan, that was going to be problematic. So it forced us to have to reroute a lot of the stuff into new walls or new cavities. Or rework the underground to accommodate our new floor plan. So all the stuff in red are all the roof drain modifications we had to make. And some of the stuff on the top left we'll speak to a little bit more, but had to rework due to some drainage challenges, you know, experienced at the front or the north canopy entrance. So next slide. And here's just some pictures to kind of show you guys, you know, some of the roof leaders we had to reroute. So, all right, next slide. Okay, so when feelings started to get demoed out, it revealed a lot of the ductwork that had just failing insulation on it, just years and years of dilapidation. And so the owner had requested that we replace insulation in a variety of areas, and so this is kind of a before and after, just general maintenance that needed to happen to these elements.
Definitely improvement.
Yep. The next slide. Okay, so what you're looking at here is you're standing inside the banquet hall and you're looking out towards what will be the pre-function corridor. And so the intent here was that we were going to basically put in new storefronts in these locations. And again, on the documents, on the as-builds that we were provided, there was no indication that there were framing members where these storefronts were supposed to go. So naturally, we had to give our structural team and confirm what needed to be done. And so ultimately, we ended up reframing that opening to accommodate the new storefronts, and those framing members were subsequently removed. So, all right, next slide. Okay, so as part of the seismic upgrades, we started to encounter all kinds of stuff in the wall cavities. This is what you're looking at as an exterior wall, and this is all, I guess, metal framing that you're seeing here. And I'm trying to probably speak to the flashing issues that we observed.
Lack thereof.
Or lack thereof, right? So when we opened up the walls, there was, I'd say, a vast majority of these exterior load-bearing members had probably the lower 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches of it just totally gone. I mean, it was rusted out over the years. And so naturally, there's some serious concerns with that being a load-bearing wall. So we consulted our structural team, and what we ended up doing, you can see that middle picture, they're sistering some metal stud framing and attaching some hold downs into the slab to support those areas. So and that occurred definitely in areas we were working in, but I'm sure in areas that was not a part of our scope, that conditions exist in other areas as well.
And I think it's important to, once again, elaborate on proper detailing in general of exterior walls. You would think of California, very low wet bulb condition, very dry climate, not that much rain, etc. But yet, how grade meets an exterior wall, it's important to have proper offsets, proper flashing detailing at the base cap, all of those kind of details and conditions really matter. Maybe not day one, but over time, obviously. And this is a great example that shows what can happen even in as nice a climate as Southern California.
Next slide.
Okay, so we talked a lot about unforeseen conditions. Towards the end of the project, it was, of course, everything was a mad dash to get completed. And so this is, as with any owner, as you start to see improvements of an existing facility, they start to look towards other things that, hey, wow, this is looking pretty good. What can we do over here to make this look a little nicer? So,
wouldn't it be nice?
Wouldn't it be nice, right? So after acquiring some additional funding, the end user, NCCS, which is Marine Corps Community Services, had requested a variety of improvements, and this is one of them. This is the main entrance storefront, and so the challenge with this was that we had really a month to a month, it was probably about a month and a half, all said and done, and this is coming to us at the tail end of the project, this request, was to, one, establish what the expectation was from the end user. Two was to get with the design team and go through engineering. Three was to get the materials released, and then four was acquire that material, which usually has a pretty long lead time for this type of stuff, and then four was to do the installation. So we were able to expedite that on all fronts and successfully get it completed in the time frame that we had communicated to the end user.
And Bill mentioned originally the idea of the other entrance and the idea of the wing or flight. This actually is sort of the reason why we followed up with that concept because the panels that are here are reflective of wings of an airplane. And that was sort of, this is the actual main entrance to the facility that faces to the street. And so that's something we wanted to sort of model as well as we could.
All right, next slide. Okay, so just wanted to touch on a few other unforeseen conditions, and you know, we had a bunch of pictures to show you guys on the other stuff, but just to quickly touch the different items that we experienced. So we had additional areas of demo that wasn't previously a part of the scope. You know, things just kind of dovetail into, you know, we tear out one area and then you end up having to renovate other spaces, you know, because of some other conditions. So we had additional abatement measures that were not planned on. We had existing hot water lines servicing various areas, i.e. the main bar area, as well as a set of gang bathrooms. And on the as-built, they were identified, I believe, as inch and a quarter or inch and a half lines. And in fact, they were, I think, 3/4 inch lines. So we ended up having to run all new water service lines to make sure that they had adequately sized lines feeding those areas. We had identified some old duct steam coils and the ductwork overhead in the main ballroom, and subsequently the owner had requested we remove those, so we did as such. And then we also had some existing drainage issues, and this is something that had plagued the owner for many years. And as everybody knows, building 101 is to make sure that the building itself is at a higher grade than the surrounding terrain. So the problem with this is, and you'll see in the pictures, the new canopy entrance and even the existing canopy entrance was at a low-lying area. So in essence, it was almost like a toilet where water would just funnel to the low area. And so it created a lot of issues with water intrusion into the facility, and kind of, I believe, in many respects, probably contributed to, you know, the framing issue we showed you guys earlier. So we had to go through a significant amount of provisions to divert that water away from that low-lying area, and you know that included adding gutters and downspouts, adding trench drains in front of doors, adding, you know, extensive underground drainage and discharging it out at swales off-site. And so ultimately, to this day, they've I mean, it's completely fixed their issue, and they haven't experienced any kind of water intrusion due to the modifications we made. So with this being an old roof, there were some active roof leaks, which presented some challenges for us, and working in those spaces, hard to hang drywall when you got water dripping over your head. So we repaired some areas on the roof at the request of the owner. And then there were a handful of electrical panels within the facility that were unsafe and non-code compliant. So you open up the panels and you've got, you know, a bird's nest in there. You know, just time for an update. So we had to replace those as well. So next slide. Okay, so among some of the fun of you know, of renovations, you always come across some interesting things. This is a petrified possum that we found in the wall cavity with rather decent dental hygiene. But anyways, it always keeps things interesting. You never know what you're going to find in the walls, and it's a prime example of that. So next slide. Okay, so among the unforeseens, we also had owner added scope. These are all the things that at the 11th hour they had requested we accommodate. So all new interior and exterior lighting throughout the entire facility. So this was a bit of a daunting challenge because there's a lot involved. Again, establishing owner expectations of what they're looking to do, getting with design, doing photometric calculations, also understanding, you know, what's needed for lighting control, and ultimately procuring the materials and implementing all that work. And so, you know, like we talked about before, we had a limited amount of scope, and then things branched out into now touching every room within the entire facility. So, and actually I have it noted on here, but by virtue of replacing some of all the lighting throughout the facility, we ended up also replacing a vast majority of the ceilings as well. So we ended up replacing the new the main bar flooring, the IDF room, the comm data and AV rooms needed some upgrades, which included ceilings, new power requirements, dedicated split systems for AC, the aforementioned main entrance storefront replacement, and then also the pool storage building fire protection, which I'll speak to here in a few slides as well in depth. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is a bit of a unique scenario that it's really a rarity when you think about it. So we do a lot of these government projects, and this, you guys can jump in as you feel necessary. But basically, the genesis of this is that with the PRV, the plant replacement value code-driven updates, we had to add a fire protection system to the facility, and so the project had some very challenged budget issues, and so we walked the facility with the end user, with our subcontractor, with our engineers, and our construction team, and we walked every single space and identified what needed to be done with a fire protection system. So, and most areas we were able to get the fire protection system above ceiling, but we also explained to the end user and our client that there were a variety of areas where we would not be able to get the piping above ceiling. So you would have exposed piping, and one of those spaces is the banquet area and the ballroom. And so, and the reason that we couldn't get it above ceiling is because it would be cost prohibitive to try to route those through structural beams, and it wasn't viable for the project. And so
yeah, so we were balancing a budget with the aesthetics.
Correct. So as the project went through development, we had the design pegged down, went through shop drawings, owner reviewed those, and we have a point of contact, which we work through on the government side, and they funnel it to all the vested entities of the project. No further feedback on the design, and really where the rubber meets the road is when we start hanging the first piece of pipe, and then people start walking through, i.e. the customer starts walking through and sees fire sprinkler pipe below ceiling running by chandeliers. It doesn't go over well. And so they, not having a full understanding of the history of how everything came to be, got with the contracting officer representative and basically issued a stop work order, said, hey, hold on. We understand, Stella, this is part of your scope and this is what was discussed. However, we don't feel that this is in the best interest of architecturally how we want our ballroom or our banquet halls to look. So the stop work order was initiated. We, kind of went back to the drawing board with our customer, and so we did a variety of things. One was redesigning it to have, because really the fire protection systems are based on efficiency and most direct routes. So here we took, you can see in the picture on the left how it just kind of cross cuts through, all these coffered ceilings, if you will. And so we redesigned it to follow the right underneath all the soffits, and so that helped hide it a little bit. The authority having jurisdiction originally required us to have to paint all the fire protection piping bright red, which for obvious reasons is a bit of an eyesore. So, in working with the fire marshal and also our client, we were able to, they permitted us to paint all the piping white and then band every 10 foot with red tape, band all the piping. So really you see in the picture on the right how much it makes it disappear. And so it was a bit of a challenge, but we were able to work together with all the vested entities and come up with a solution that works for everybody and the budget. Okay, next slide, please. I'll make it quick because I know we're running close on time here. So a few other pictures. So the picture on the right is the main bar area. So again, working with the end user, we came up with some solutions, and you'll see some final pictures of what it looks like now. But they ended up having us add a drop-down ceiling, so we could conceal the fire protection piping in this area, as well as add a soffit for the 4-inch main that was running along the bulkhead over the bar area. And then same thing on the left, you had another little 4-inch main that was running in front of one of their insignia. That so it's a little bit taboo there. So we ended up having to reroute that stuff, and ultimately they ended up getting what worked best for everybody. So and then the picture in the middle is what I touched on briefly, which was making sure that we had adequate separation from, there's a pool storage building that is a standalone structure, and if it's, according to USC, within 10 foot of the main building, it had to have fire protection or had to be sprinkled. So we ended up having to tap into the new system we put in the main building and route it out to the pool storage building. So not something we had anticipated or were contracted to do. So our next slide. Okay.
So on the right-hand side, you see the original existing sort of user entrance from the parking area. From an ATFP standpoint, the anti-terrorist force protection requirements, this facility was a low-level condition. It was in a protected environment, more than 50 feet away from perimeter fencing, et cetera. So our scope, we only had to deal with the glazing, the framing, those kind of things. Everything else was deemed to be acceptable as it was. And you see the large bollards that existed day one to also provide additional protection. But that said, this is how we interpreted the idea of the wing to capture a new primary functioning entrance. We also had to deal with ADA access requirements to ramp down. At the same point, as Bill pointed out, the issue of how to resolve grade, because this is one of the areas where water would flow into the banquet areas to the right. And what you see here now in the finished photo to the right is the new exterior envelope of the pre-function corridor. Next slide. This is interior of that pre-function corridor. We had to also deal with the existing roof elevation and how to keep water off of the new roof expansion from existing and how to keep that all working together. So we had very limited ceiling height. So we worked with exposed structure. And once again, the columns are all independent of the prior existing exterior wall. So this is that new corridor now.
Next slide.
This is once again that new main front entrance, as Bill pointed out, with the new storefront systems. And you see to the far right wall where there's lights on the exterior wall. Above that are the architectural caps that we installed around the exposed structural beams, as he pointed out earlier. Next slide. This is the main bar as it's finished. The backdrop to the main bar to the left was original. We just refinished it and retrofitted it to accommodate all the new bar function and requirements. And then, of course, everything else we did with new flooring, new ceiling, new front bar, main bar, et cetera, to update this entire area. Next slide. The new kitchen, once again, this shows the main hood above the main cooking area within the kitchen. Of course, it's a much larger space, but this is just one detail showing where all the different kettles and things and floor drainage requirements and all the finished flooring, et cetera, that's needed to make this effective. Next slide. And then now the, Bill, if you want to describe the WOXOF Bar.
Yeah, sure. So this is, I guess, considered one of their sacred spaces. And as Daniel had mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, there is ostensibly some cinematic history here where I guess part of the movie Top Gun was filmed, during the bar scene. You've lost that lovin' feelin. And so anyway, it's a revered space. Just a quick history of the cloud that you see in there, the giant concrete cloud. It's a little unsightly, but there's some significance to it. WOXOF stands for weather obscured, zero visibility, and fog. So it's an aviation term when I guess you're flying and you are basically blinded by the weather conditions. So anyway, this is a bar space full of pilots to come and kind of talk about their missions and chat over what their dogfights were like, and it's just a space for the aviators to really come together. And so this space went from what looked like a zombie den to a new, fresh, functional space. So next slide. And then here's the gang bathrooms before and after, so much needed facelift, as you can see. Next slide. And then here's the banquet hall. So again, you see the storefronts that access the pre-function corridor. They wanted to do away with the chandeliers and go back with all new can lighting, LED lights. So next slide. And then ribbon cutting, you can see the CO and the XO and the end users that manage the facility. So overall, a successful project, and definitely had its challenges, but overcame, and everybody was, the end users, extremely happy with the end result. Next slide. So hopefully everybody found all that information interesting and maybe even useful and whatever facet of the industry you guys are in. And I don't know if you guys, we can probably go into the question.
Yep. Next slide. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Bill and Joe and Tony. Thank you for this presentation. And like I said, we're going to have some Q&A here from the audience. So as a reminder, everyone, feel free to, if you've got any questions for anything that's gone over in the presentation, just put them in the questions pane on your control panel. I'll be kind of in about to our speakers here as much as time allows for us. So I think the first question that I had for you all is, let's talk about that stop work order. What would you say are some of the big lessons learned or other kind of key takeaways from going through that process, in case, heaven forbid, somebody else here on the call will have to go through that as well?
That's a great question, and we've thought about that a lot. One of the things with fire protection, our task was to be low price, very economical. And we looked at it as that. They had a budget, and we had a design to their budget. Looking back, we probably should have done a better job to actually do layovers of the FPE on the lighting plan, reflective ceiling plan, to better understand conflicts, to better understand how the piping is going to be routed. Could we have done a better job of routing the piping under faux soffits? That's kind of the big lesson learned, in my opinion, because even though the design was sound and even though stakeholders reviewed and approved it, once the pipe was in the air, people, including us, would say, well, I don't know about this. This is not very sightly. But then again, we were dealing with a budget that we had to maintain. And so as a team, I think we all regrouped and came up with a better game plan to provide the surface-mounted fire protection in a way that wasn't unsightly. And one of the improvements that they allowed us to do is not paint it red. Yeah. That was huge. But there was a process, and we had to get stakeholder buy-in on certain areas where we started the work to make sure that there was some buy-in, because the banquet hall it's a very busy, highly used area that they wanted to have continue as a showpiece.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it sounds like really keeping the lines of communications open before, during, after, a lot of that stakeholder buy-in, always a critical point. All right. Anybody else want to jump in on that, or I can move on to some other questions?
I think that was pretty good. We can move on.
All right. So here's another. We've got a couple questions kind of around this same topic here about, obviously this was, there's a lot of work that happened with on this project here. So was there any thought at all about demoing the entire facility at any point and building a totally new one? Would it have been more cost effective to demolish and rebuild? Which I think kind of goes back to, like you were saying, Joe, probably about the cost restraints of the budget. But any thoughts about that?
So from our perspective, that's always an option. But because of the 60-year history of this facility and the memories that it affords retired and active duty, they felt that the history of that building warranted preserving it and providing the upgrades to afford another 40, 50 years.
I think that's well said. I think because one can always think new is better, but in certain cases, to Joe's point, those memories, I mean, people's families have existed here over time. There have been weddings, there have been receptions, there have been all kinds of things, visits from, the commander-in-chief, who knows? So at some point in time, one has to evaluate, who has a right to say new is better versus let's just renovate and deal with it as we need to. In this case, it was iconic. It also had the movie of Top Gun, had a number of things in favor for it. So ultimately, the hard decision was made to keep it and to renovate it as needed, but now the right decision is the end result.
Yeah, there were certainly conversations throughout the endeavor of building this thing or renovating it that, man, we should have just demoed it. And that's coming from the end user's mouth. But, to Tony's point, the end result was, we fought through the storm, and the end result is what was most desired. So, next question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really well said. And to kind of branch off of that question, when you're working on an iconic building like this, there's some considerations that have to be made for the memorabilia. There's a lot of sentimental value associated with it. How does that factor in when you're making design decisions? What are things that for anybody else who would be working on a building that would have kind of a similar sentimental value or want to capture some of that previous existing memorabilia, how did you guys capture that and make sure that it remained through the renovation?
Well, first we worked closely with the user as they were establishing the scope of work to understand why, what was important, what mattered, what history needed to be retained. And of course, originally, certain areas like even the WOXOF room was sort of off limits and wasn't even part of that original scope. So sometimes, our clients' desires or requests, they don't even necessarily know the level of effort that they need to get into. But as a team, we established and identified some of the key components and the concerns from their end that we needed to hold dearly. In this case, also, the kitchen itself was going to serve other areas as well as a banquet center and also as a catering kitchen. So some of those additional requirements come into play as to how the users are going to operate. And one has to truly understand those means and methods because, we were not there day one. We've never really been there. We've never used the facility. So we had to get a really good understanding from them as to how they were going to operate what kind of timeframes they're going to work around, et cetera. So all of those things came into play for us to establish the criteria going forward.
Great, thanks, Tony. So let's change topics a little bit, get into some of the technical details here. I had a question here. Did you ever consider sound insulation for the building to insulate against aircraft noise?
That was not an issue from the basis standpoint or concern. Noise is something that they've dealt with over time. And as far as the type of construction of the facility, with the new laminated glazing systems that already met a certain level of sound coefficient, the wood frame construction, all the layers of roofing that were added over time and that we of course patched as well, added significant value to that envelope from a noise sound standpoint. And then new ceilings that were installed, suspended ceiling systems, acoustical tile systems, et cetera, aided that as well. So from an overall noise concern standpoint, the scopes of work pretty much addressed that as well as could be intended.
All right, thanks, Tony. So I saw there's a question here about showing the slide deck to the Air Force Academy Civil Engineering students. So just as a reminder, everybody, you can download from the handout section. You should be able to download both the slide deck and your PDH certificate for today's presentation. Just make sure that you download those before you head out. And then there's one last question here. We've got just a little bit of time that I'll get for you guys. Just about with all of these unforeseen conditions and other things that you've kind of encountered through the process here of this project, how is the overall schedule impacted?
That's a great question. So between the stop work order and then the additional scope, owner-driven scope, the time extension was roughly 10 months?
6 months.
Or 6 months.
6 months.
And so there was some pretty intensive negotiations as it relates to cost, but we worked it out as a team, and ultimately stakeholders are happy.
Yeah, and it's a very challenging aspect because naturally everyone wants the building just as fast as they can get it, but as soon as you step foot into that building, you start demoing out things. I mean, there are legitimate things that nobody could have ever forecasted or planned for. So things just in construction take time to want to do the analysis and figure out what the issue is, how we need to address it and move forward with a new design.
And what made this successful is I think the stakeholders, they understood that. They realized that moving forward, things are going to change. It's the reality of an extensive renovation of a building that's over 60 years old. So that was big. Their expectations were consistent with us.
Yeah, and we expedited things on all fronts, but not at the compromise of quality. So we probably could have come up with some other solutions that would have been faster, but not necessarily better in the long run for the end user. So we want to make sure that that's one of our staples of our company is making sure that the quality is there.
Good question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, I think it's kind of a major takeaway that I'm hearing here at least is, of course, I think, everybody knows, but it always bears repeating the real importance of keeping those lines of communication open and, always setting expectations and having, those conversations with the end users and the stakeholders to make sure that everybody is on the same page throughout every step of a project like this.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
All right. So thank you, Joe, Bill, and Tony. Looks like we're just about out of time. So but thank you all for coming here today and giving your presentation. And thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. So if you are interested in submitting an article for the military engineer, please go ahead, visit our website. You can see our editorial calendar and our writer's guidelines there. We're currently open for article proposals for our May-June 2021 issue. That will focus again on project delivery. So if you've got a great project that you think could really help out some of your fellow engineers to hear about, feel free to send it on to us. We'd love to take a look at it. Please make sure before you head out today to download your PDH certificate from the handout section. You can also grab a copy of the slide deck there. After leaving the webinar, you'll be directed to a brief survey on the presentation. Please fill it out if you can. We do greatly appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. So on behalf of SAME, the military engineer, and our featured presenters, thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Goodbye.